Good morning, Lakeview. We are going to continue the series that we've been in on Sunday morning, but before we jump into that, I'm going to speak about two things that I'm wildly ignorant about. I'm ignorant about them because in I think 2 weeks, it will be my 4-year anniversary at Lakeview. Isn't that crazy? Can you even imagine? It's been 4 years, almost. I celebrate early. For my birthday, it's an entire month. But that's the way it should be. But I want to talk about just a couple things before we jump into our lesson that I'm ignorant about because I've only been here for 4 years. And the first one is this. If you are not tracking this, and it's okay, this is one of the most challenging things about church work, is I can get up and give an announcement week after week after week after week. We can put it in the bulletin week after week after week after week, and I will still have people come up and say, "Hey, what are the details about this?" I mean, this is just part of, church work. Either they miss announcements, they don't end up reading it in the bulletin or something like this. But if you've missed the memo up until this point, because it is Bond Sunday, that means that the funding aspect of our building program is closing. I mean, the capital campaigns, this is when we end up with what looks like for the church a mortgage, and that means earth begins to move. And for those of you who have been here longer than me, I know your reaction already. It is, we have been in a building campaign forever. How will it actually come to an end? And all I know is that this building campaign started, and without a doubt, Satan threw everything at it, because when we started our first capital campaign, the entire economy for North America collapsed. I think that's a pretty good attack, personally. but I asked, the elders, well, we expected more from this capital campaign. What happened? And they're like, look at the date. Oh, yeah, that's 2008. I know what happened then. People lost their jobs. Everybody moved. And how long does it take for a church to recoup and recover from a start and a stumble like that? And the answer seems to be about 9 years? About now. But we're actually there. And for those of you who are like, I'll believe it when I see it, well, get ready. But for those of you who have given and you're like, it can't come soon enough, congratulations, because we're right there. Here's what Bond Sunday means for us. It means that our congregation bonds are unique to me, and I'm not a professional, and there will be an explanation at lunch today from professionals who can correct anything that I'm wrong about. Okay, but what bonds mean for us as a congregation is the congregation takes what looks like a loan, but instead of taking a loan from a traditional institution, we have a list of bonds that we get to issue, and we issue them to you. And if you don't buy them, we issue them on a secondary market, and they will all get purchased, which means we're at the spot here where we have funding. What happens for us here on Bond Sunday is we're trying to figure out how much from our primary offer, that's us, whoever is here over this next week, making appointments and taking bonds and purchasing bonds, we figure out how much it's actually going to cost us, because if you buy bonds instead of Joe Schmo off the street buying bonds, we actually save a lot of money, not an insignificant amount. And I was talking with the elders earlier this week about our bond program and what's going on this afternoon for the lunch. We're going to have lunch, by the way. It's provided, and I want to encourage you to stay. I actually had this conversation with the elders this last week, and I said, "Can I encourage them to stick around if they haven't signed up?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, but what if they haven't signed up and we're not prepared for them?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Are you sure that's okay?" And they said, "Oh yes, good grief, we want them to come. Blow the doors off. They need to be here to hear about our bond sales. We'll scramble. We will find food. And so here's my encouragement to you. If you have been on the sidelines and you're like, what are bonds? What is this thing? Well, or maybe you're like me and your eyes kind of glaze over as soon as people start talking about money, right? Here. There is an opportunity, and we want you to stick around and hear about this, because it's surprising to me how many people, almost all of us, have the means to be able to purchase bonds and assist the church in this way. But if you've never done it, it sounds strange. And so we have professionals here with us this afternoon to share that. And, there's a little bit of psychological warfare here. For several years, I had people who said, Ben, you're not supposed to mention food when you get up and preach. It just makes everybody hungry. And then they want to get out sooner. Conveniently, I know a place where you can get a free meal and you don't have to travel anywhere once we get done. See what I did there? I have no idea what's on the menu, but I do know that we've got it and it's prepared. I want to encourage you, if you haven't thought about it, think about it. You have a few days here to decide still if buying bonds are for you, but you'll get information after services. So I really do want to encourage you to consider how to do that. People use retirement funds and reallocate them sometimes for a brief period of time. Sometimes they have them in savings accounts. There's a lot of stuff. They can go over all that. But I want to encourage you to be here for this, because this means, yes, after a very, very, very long slog for us as a church, amen? No, okay, I'll try this one more time. This means for us, after a very long slog as a church, we're there. Okay? So, I encourage you to stick around. Even if you're not signed up, learn about what it is that we're doing. There's an opportunity here for you to be engaged. Like I said, we're going to jump into our text. It's the fourth part of a four-part series, and we're going to start with a responsive reading. If you've been here for the last several weeks, you already know the drill. I read what is in white. We together will read what is in yellow. And here we go. How many are your words, O Lord? In wisdom you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. There is the sea, vast and spacious, teeming with creatures beyond number. Living things, both large and small, there the ships go to and fro, and the Leviathan, which you formed to frolic there. These all look to you to give them their food at the proper time. When you give it to them, they gather it up. When you open your hand, they are satisfied with good things. When you hide your face, they are terrified. When you take away their breath, they die and return to the dust. And when you send your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the earth. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works. He who looks at the earth and it trembles, who touches the mountains and they smoke. I will sing to the Lord all my life. I will sing praise to my God as long as I live. May the meditation be pleasing to him as I rejoice in the Lord. Church, there is a confession that we have when we open up the Bible. When we open up Scriptures, we take a look at what we see in Genesis. And it begins by saying, in the beginning, God. Nothing else is needed except for those few words for us to be able to hang and linger and recognize that we're reading something important about who God is, right? And the rest of the book starts unfolding, and we begin to understand that in the beginning, God means that in the beginning, God had all of the power. He had all of the creative processes, and he spoke and things came into being. And because he is God creator, and we are men created, we can look at Genesis and start peeling back layer after layer to see that there is something just so fundamental about who we are, and it's a part of our creation. We've spent the last 3 weeks taking a look at different relationships. The very first one was man and the creation, the Adam who was made out of the Adama. And there is a relationship there between man and the earth and the rest of creation that Genesis describes there in chapter 2. Chapter 2 also describes the very beginning of this relationship between the man and the woman, how the two were meant to have lives that intertwine, that fulfill each other, that are woefully painful when it goes wrong, but woefully right when it goes right. The third one, last week, we took a look at man and the Creator. Something as fundamental as Adam and Eve being placed in the garden. Anything is available except this one choice. And Adam and Eve had to decide whether the truth of what God said was good, or whether they would choose their own path and declare what they think as good is good. Those have not changed. They've never changed because that's a part of who we are and how God made the world to work and people to work. That's true for you, whether you're a Christian confessing God or somebody who doesn't know anything. These are just truisms about who we are because we are created by the Creator and this is how we were made. But here's the last one. There is a relationship between the man and the man. And it's described here in Genesis chapter 4. And it's described not by Adam and Eve like all the rest is, but it's described and it unfolds because we have Cain and Abel here before God. And I want to take a look at this text again, chapter 4, starting with verse 1. We're going to read through this together. And I want to point out some things that, if you've always grown up reading the Bible, you probably skip over some of this. Some of it's actually not that easy to grasp unless I pause and point it out to you. So I want you to notice it. Okay, so Genesis chapter 4, starting with verse 1, it says, "Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel." Now that word Cain, you probably have a footnote there. It rhymes. It sounds almost exactly like the word gotten, obtained, I have received, right? And most people who look at this text believe that when Eve finally here gives birth to Cain, realize this is a first, right? You have Adam, who is a man, and then Eve was formed out of a part of Adam, but there was no new man ever made until Cain came about. And so this is new. And they have history already in the garden because Adam and Eve had already rebelled against God. God had at length told them what was to come for the man, for the woman, and for the serpent. I don't know if you recall some of these. He says in chapter 3, verse 15, he says, "I will put enmity between you," talking to the serpent, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." And so here you have Eve. Some commentators believe that when Cain came about, she was so elated that she named him Cain because she finally got a man that she believed was maybe even a fulfillment of this prophecy over here. See, God promised that I would have a seed, and this seed would be locked in conflict with the serpent, but here it is, and God is faithful. I mean, Cain comes, and everything about what she says is a celebration of this man that was given to her, her firstborn son, the beginning of women giving birth to the rest of mankind, right? And so she gets Cain, and she says, "I have gotten him," and so the name is like, I've gotten. Look at what I've gotten. Look at this. Can't blame Eve for that. But the next son, verse 2, says, "And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of the sheep, and Cain was a worker of the ground." And so it talks a little bit about who they are. But if we don't know this word, we'll skip right past it. Do you know what the word Abel means? It's actually a really common word in Hebrew. You've actually read it several times without knowing it. It means a vapor. A vapor that, like when you're in a cold day, a vapor that you go and you exhale. You found it in Scripture many, many, many times. In fact, this word Abel, is in Ecclesiastes. It's translated in Ecclesiastes 1:2. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. Right? Maybe in your Bible it's translated as meaningless. Maybe it's translated as vanity, like it is in the ESV. But that word vanity, meaningless, what is your Bible translated as? Nothing good, right? Ecclesiastes, this book is built around this idea. Everything that man pursues is a point of vanity. And that's the word Abel. That's the name Abel in Hebrew. And it is not necessarily a word that describes vanity, but what it does is it describes how temporal, how insignificant, how meaningless something is. Right? The actual word describes on a cold day when you breathe out that mist and then it disappears. That's what the actual word means. It's translated vanity, it's translated meaningless, it's translated temporary, it's translated a bunch of ways. And while it doesn't explicitly mean worthless, it does offer something about worth. Okay? And I want you to see that because if you were a Hebrew reader for the very first time, this would not be lost on you, but because we translate it differently, we don't always catch this. And so it says, now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother. He's not going to be here long. Look, God has been faithful. He's given me everything that He's promised. Here I have Cain. Oh yeah, and there's the other one. I mean, this is what the text says, right? As it introduces Cain and it introduces Abel. I don't know. There's got to be a story there about why Eve or Adam said yes, named Abel, but the text calls Abel. It says, now Abel was a keeper of sheep and Cain was a worker of the ground, and in the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. And Cain spoke to his brother Abel when they were in the field, and Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel, your brother? And he said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And then God responds, the voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are accursed from the ground, which has opened up its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. And he continues on, and Cain receives a curse. Now, if you're just casually reading this, you probably don't have any idea that that's coming. Because up until this point, as Adam is a man who was created from the ground, right, and he has this connection with the ground, you get to this spot where their firstborn, Cain, is also a worker of the ground. And you see the ebb and flow of mankind with his relationship with the earth, and it all seems like things are fitting together. Of course, Cain is going to be this young man of promise. Of course, he is going to be the hero of the story. Of course, he is everything that God expected. And oh yeah, there's Abel. But when Cain came to give his offering to God, and Abel came to give his offering to God, the text is turned on its head. And it says, God had regard for Abel and for his offering. And it was not the end of the story. But for his brother Cain, who instead of being happy for Abel, began to seethe in anger. You know, the Bible is filled with teachings on love and hate, and for words that we use in our culture all the time, we use them flippantly and often without context. But the Bible talks a lot about love and hate. In fact, you can't read through the Gospel of John and not believe that Jesus thinks pretty highly of the value of love. But a lot of times we don't think in biblical terms about these ideas of love and hate. What Jesus says in Matthew 5, 21 and 22, he says this. He says, "You have heard that it was said of those of old, 'You shall not murder, but whoever murders will be liable to judgment.'" This is a part of a broader context where Jesus says, "This is what you've read in the law, but I say to you this. This is what you've heard, but I say to you this. This is how this has been interpreted, but I say to you this." And every time he does this, he says, "This is the external thing, but there was something inside of you before that led to this," right? And so here he's talking about murder, and Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment.' But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment." You know, in fact, actually the Bible is really consistent about this. It creates a continuum of love and hate. And on one side, on the hate side, it says on this side of the continuum, you have hate. You have, here's one more here. 1 John 3:5. Everyone who hates his brother is a murderer. So on this side of the continuum, you have anger, you have hate, and it leads to somebody dying. Murder. Right? But there's another side to the continuum that the Bible talks about pretty extensively. On this side of the continuum, over there you have hate, so on this side you have, are you awake? All right. On that side of the continuum, you have hate. So on this side of the continuum, you have. On that side, you have anger. So on this side, you have peace or joy or happiness. On that side, you have somebody dying. And on this side, you have. No, you don't have life. You don't. You actually don't. In fact, the Bible is really consistent about this too. In 1 John chapter 3, verses 16 through 18. "By this we know love. By this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and that we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or in talk, but in deed and in truth." And the weird thing about this teaching is that the Bible is actually really consistent about this. Over on this side, you can have hate and you can have anger, and it leads to murder. But on this side, if you have love and you have peace, it leads to self-sacrifice instead. That's where it leads. And so in this strange, ancient, Semitic way of thinking, the end result is still going to be that somebody gives up and dies. Right? If you hate somebody, it's going to be them. And if you love somebody, it will be you. I cannot tell you how many times I'll be there at the altar with a couple, and they're offering their vows to each other, saying they're going to stand by each other, and they promise to love each other through thick and thin. And yet this one thing that they don't get for several years in their marriage is, no, you actually have to give up you. You give up your rights to being right. You give this up because you love that person. And so by some strange twist of logic, the opposite of hate is not life. It's me giving up my life. And like John says there's no example better than Christ, who showed his love by giving up his life on the cross. To hate is to take someone's life, and to love is to give yours. Going back to Cain and Abel, because this really has to do with the relationship between Cain and Abel, and this has to do with where this is driving about our relationship between each other, brother and brother, man and man, right? Going back to Cain and Abel, so you have this narrative, this dysfunction already in place, right? You have Cain, and he's supposed to be the hero. You have Abel, and he's clearly the other child. And you have Cain, who is doing everything that is noble, and you have Abel, who is doing the other thing. Every family has a child that chooses their own way, right? Come on. It's true, and you know it. You have Cain, who's doing the family trait, and you have Abel, who's choosing his own path. And then they both go to offer a sacrifice to God. Cain stuff from the ground, and Abel something from his herds. And verse 4 says, "And the Lord had regard for Abel." You remember his name means meaningless, right? Right. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. Now, you can read plenty of commentaries where they talk about the mechanics of maybe why one person's offering was wrong and unaccepted and the other one was accepted. And I think that there's merit to studying some of those things, but that's not the point I'm driving at here. I want you to feel the weight of that one sentence. When the two of them come, they give their offering to God, and God takes Abel. And he says, yes, this. And then Cain is not happy, and he's seething, and he's angry, and he pouts, and they go into the field, and he plots. And in a really strange twist of irony, instead of Cain being the man who crushes the head of the serpent, he kills his brother. And when God comes to confront Cain about his hate and his murder, Cain shrugs it off, and he asks, "Where is Abel, your brother?" And he says, "I don't know." Lie. And then he says something that almost sounds like the lie, and it almost sounds like the truth. He says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And even now, thousands of years later, you and I wrestle with that because we want to say no. But yes. Right? No, I'm not your keeper and you're not my keeper. I'm going to do what I want when I want. And I had this down as a teenager. My teenagers have this down now. You need to go do this. I do what I want. Now, clearly he's not his brother's keeper. There was never anything in Cain's heart. There was never anything about how Cain behaved that communicated that he loved or valued or cared about his brother's success. Right? His brother goes and he makes an offering to God. And instead of saying, "Wow, look at you and how close you are with God," Cain is seething and angry. Is Cain his brother's keeper? No, absolutely not. But he should have been. Everything about the story tells us that he should have been. The privileged child, the one who was first. Everything works together for Cain to be in the position to care for Abel, but he doesn't. And what's just so sad about that is he could have just been happy for Abel. He could have. But don't lose sight of this, guys, because this is where the rubber meets the road. Satan uses the exact same lie today. If I were to ask you, are you your brother's keeper? There's going to be a part of you that wants to say, no. right? No. No, they can do whatever they want. They can't tell me what to do. I'm not going to tell them what to do. I am not my brother's keeper. You go your way, you go your way. I'll conduct my business, you conduct yours. It's really American. We really like this. And Satan uses this same lie today because he tells me whatever is going on in your life, whatever pain you experience, it's not my problem. But it's still a lie. It's as much of a lie today as it was in the garden. The truth is, we are our brothers. We are brothers' keepers. 59 times. There are 59 one another passages in the New Testament. 59. I know preachers who have spent an entire year on these. 59. And every single one of them, every one of them is about how I can seek the best for you and how you can seek the best for me. Another lie that we tell ourselves. Well, of course I'm not my brother's keeper. That's the elder's job. That's why we have paid professional preachers. They get up there. They can do all the hospital visits. They can do all the counseling. They can walk with people. And I'm telling you guys, I get really tired sometimes. But it's a lie anyway. It was never my job. It was never the elder's job. It is our responsibility as brothers and sisters to actually be each other's keepers. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. We ask you, brothers, to respect those who labor among you and are over you in the Lord and admonish you, and to esteem them very highly in love because of their work. Here's where we're at. Be at peace among yourselves, and we urge you, brothers, to admonish the idle, to encourage the faint-hearted, to help the weak, to be patient with them all. See that no one repays evil for evil, but always seek to do good for one another and with everyone. Are we our brother's keeper? The answer in the Bible is yes, over and over again. And even this text, Romans chapter 14 is one of my favorites, because Romans chapter 14 is broken up essentially into two different ideas, right? The very first half of the chapter is don't judge your brothers. Is that the one we want to go to when we say, I'm not my brother's keeper? Because the second half of that chapter is so build each other up and encourage one another, right? This is a twofer. The first half, essentially, we will each give our own account unto God. Yes, that's true. But part of that account will be whether I am building you up, whether you love your brother, whether I give for you. One of the difficult things about ministry, and I wrestle through this because it's been about 20 years now, and I've wrestled through different cycles of this, where giving and giving and giving and giving, and there's never enough time. There's never enough money. There's a finite limit to the bottom of what I can reach for and give. And yet, this is still a part of how we support and show love for one another. It won't ever go away. This is foundational for us loving each other. So, my question to you, it's a really easy one to ask. It's actually really hard to answer. Are you your brother's keeper? No, that's a loaded question because before you answer that, you have to look around this room and ask yourself, lock eye contact with people here and say, do I love them enough to seek the very best for them? Do I love them enough to give from myself for them and for their success? Do I? And if you lock eyes with somebody here and the only thing that runs through your mind is, man, he really chaps me. I'm really frustrated. And those times when you watch them stumble and fall, and you feel just a little bit satisfied about that, okay, check. That's a checkpoint in your soul about whether you love your brothers or not, and whether you're seeking the best for them or not. And this, by the way, this is not even just an us conversation. It goes all the way back to Genesis. We're talking about man and mankind. It is the church's responsibility, it's mine and yours, not just to cheer and be happy for your success in life, but it's our responsibility to be happy for the success of our neighbors too. It is my job to be my brother's keeper, not just yours, but my neighbors all along the block. To cheer for them when they come into a better relationship with God. And to work for their good. It spills over. It's not just a peer-to-peer thing. This means that I care about you or your kids or your grandkids. And I want to build them up too. And if it's been lost on you up until this point, the reason Lakeview is actually at the point we're at with this building project, it's because we care about our kids. You know, last week I did a little bit of a circuit as we started our new quarter. And I went to 4 different classrooms. And out of the 4 classrooms, 2 of them were packed to the gills, overflowing with kids. There was literally standing room only in 2 of those classrooms. The other 2 classrooms were never intended to be classrooms to begin with. And those teachers are falling all over themselves trying to create and facilitate a learning environment. And for as many conversations as I've had with people about why we need an education wing built, here, it's because we love our kids. It is. And because we want to be our children's keepers. To build them up and to lift them up and to offer them to God and to launch them and to cheer for their successes and to give them everything that they can to succeed in life and faith. That's why. And it's painful because here we are so many years after we started the venture, and we have people who have moved and given deeply and dearly. We have people who have passed on. And even since I've been here, I can name their names. And what they've given has been deep and it's been sacrificial. And it has been in every way my definition of love for somebody else. And it's a privilege to be at this spot. We have military families who have given, knowing that the people who will be built up and kept in faith, they're never going to know. And they're never going to see. Because they've left. I'm proud to be a part of this body and this legacy of giving. And just speaking of me, just in the last 4 years, we made a pledge 3 years ago, and Satan saw my basement. We made a pledge 3 years ago, and Satan saw my basement. And he said, let's see the depth of your resolve, Mr. Cook. You said you're going to give this money to the church because you believe in what's going on over here and the future of these kids. Let's see the depth of your resolve. And I know there are people here who have walked through worse. But for me, it hasn't been worse than what we've experienced in our house in the last 2 years, 3 years. It has been the most significant financial disaster I've ever experienced in my life. And yet, we plan on exceeding our pledge. It gets real. It gets real when you say you love somebody enough to be their keeper and to give of yourself. And so for those of you who are here and you've already done that and you've done it significantly, I'm thankful for you. I really am. I really am. I'm proud to walk with you. And you've been doing it longer than I have. But to be really blunt, and to make this really a straightforward thing, the choice has been pretty straightforward. Either we give up and sacrifice things for our children, or we give up our children. It's the same choice you have with your brother or sister if you're in conflict with them. You either give up your dignity and your right to be right, or you give up your brother. It's true of your marriage. You give up your rights, or you give up your marriage. But you can rarely do both and do them well. You know, one of the things that is so frustrating to me is I have such a difficult time sharing the gospel with people. Not that I'm not happy to talk about Christ to you or to anybody. I'm excited to. Jesus has been everything. He's my whole life, and He's more. He's my life yet to come. But the challenge for me in sharing Jesus is that sometimes I'm too honest. Now, and I really mean that. I don't mean that in a negative way, but I mean when we start opening up the Bible and we take a look at what it says about being a new life, what it means to die to yourself in baptism and to raise up in newness of life, what it means to be dead to yourself and alive to Christ. You know, I look at discipleship and I say, these people literally, the idea that Jesus says, go and make disciples of all nations, they literally gave up everything that they ever had. They became homeless like their rabbi was homeless, and they wandered everywhere, and their lives were never the same, and they were flung into far corners of the world. And when I say, yeah, you want to put on Christ in baptism, that means you give up you. You know, sacrifice is not new to the Christian faith, but we've watered it down for a long, long time. And only now that it gets real do people pause and they say, do I really want this? My whole life, everything at the foot of the cross. I wish I could tell people, it's okay. Just get wet. The rest will come. But I find that I'm perpetually honest with this. It requires saying no to yourself and yes to Christ. This is the foundation of our faith. It's the confession of our faith that Jesus gave His life and we give ours.